Strong, confident country doesn't get easily offended. A strong, confident country doesn't get easily offended. Um, I'm just putting out that statement to for viewers to kind of reflect on a little bit. With this video, I want to discuss several issues: nationalism, sensitivity, and cultural differences in terms of what is perceived to be sensitive and what is not. Now, this video is intended to be quite broad ranging, um, and the first statement I made is my own opinion, but I think there's definitely truth in it, and I think it's something that can be applied to logic. I mean, it seems to me that if we use an analogy of countries being like people, if you had a person who was always kind of, let's say, thinking about how they look and always taking the nuances of what other people say to be a personal slight or a personal insult, we would say that person is sensitive or overly sensitive. So when I make that analogy with countries, um, some people may say it's you can't compare countries to people in that sense. Obviously, countries are not people, but if we take countries to be personification in that sense, countries are in some ways defined by the society which they cover. And there's no question about it, there is different cultural attitudes around the world. Some parts of the world where something may be very, very taboo, whereas in another part of the world it would be, a non issue. There's countless examples of this. Just to give a few examples, in Thailand, issues to do with the monarchy are very, very sensitive. In parts of Central Asia, there's a lot of sensitivity over cuisine, um, over insult to what people eat, or perceived insult. Um, and I'm sure there is examples could be found all over the world. In America, race is a sensitive issue. So, all over the world there are particular issues, but I do think it's fair to say, and this may be a provocative statement, but I do think some countries are more sensitive than others when it comes to external critique. China, for example, I think it's not that it's the only country that is sensitive to outside critique, but I think there is some focus on it because it is a powerful country and it's a rising superpower. The Chinese government, it seems to me, always finds ways to be offended about something. And in recent years, the number of times that Chinese state media has issued declarations of offence and wanting whichever the offending party is perceived to be to make an apology. I actually posted this status on my Facebook profile, the original statement that I made, and a Chinese contact of mine replied, and I couldn't quite work out if she was agreeing with me or not. She said something about, it was a little bit of maybe lost in translation. She said she couldn't agree more, something about strong, confident nations don't defend insult, or I don't know. I think maybe she'd misunderstood what I was saying. The point I would make is that I think most of us inherently have a sort of patriotic gene. Not everybody, but I think probably the majority of people have a natural inclination to want to defend their country. And I won't be a hypocrite, I won't lie, there have been times when the UK has been chastised and I have been a bit knee jerk and I've wanted to defend my country's reputation. Sometimes it is because I have honestly felt that the critique was unfair or misplaced. But if truth be told, there has been a knee jerk reaction there. And I think most people, if they're being honest, don't like to hear criticism of their country. It takes an open minded person, though. We have to step outside the bubble and think, well, just because it's an outsider saying it doesn't mean that it's not true. Now, in some cultures, there is a concept of saving face. So, what I find is a lot of Chinese people get incredibly nationalistic and defensive about China's reputation And yet they would actually be saying some very similar things on Chinese forums themselves. So it's not necessarily a case that they disagree with what the criticism is. It's that they're just being nationalistic for the sake of it. And I know this because I've seen Chinese netizens basically say the same things, make the same criticism about it could be anything, it could be, issues to do with pollution or not so much human rights. That's not, a subject that people can freely discuss over there, but there are issues that Chinese netizens themselves criticize about China. And yet when foreigners do it, that's like there's sort of this knee jerk reaction. I would make an analogy, it's a bit like people kind of feel like they can criticize a family member, but if an outsider does it, they will defend that family member. So it's quite an interesting phenomenon. And I'm not saying China is unique in this. I'm not, this is something I think that could be seen across countries. Um, I think that there has been an emergence of nationalism in Western countries, especially in America, with the rise of Donald Trump. I mean, there's no question about it. There is some very intense nationalism at Trump rallies, and I don't think anyone can dispute that. Within Europe, there has been a nationalistic response, but I think what's happened in Europe is that has been a response to neoliberalism that has been perceived to be incredibly weak. I mean, when European leaders deal with terrorism by refusing to talk about what the nature of the terrorism is, it's understandable that people will be pissed off. In the case of Germany, and this might sound like an extraordinary thing to say, but if a German nationalism increases, frankly, I won't be surprised. Um, I believe Angela Merkel's policy of letting in 1 million people at once was incredibly reckless. And to be honest, this is really going to, you know, turn things around. I even know left wing Germans who are now saying that was a grave mistake. Um, Now, my own position on immigration is kind of in the middle. I'm not with those who say that there should be absolutely, pull up the drawbridge and don't let anyone in. I do think that there is a case for allowing in people who genuinely are fleeing war and persecution, especially vulnerable people. But I don't think there's anything remotely racist about countries being sensible in terms of having some common sense controls as to who they let into their own country. This applies to any country. I believe every country in the world has a right to have some notion as to who they let in and who they don't let in. That seems to me to be common sense. Um, but in this 21st century world, people do move around. That's also a fact of the modern world. Um, but to get back to my original point, there's parts of the world where people have this kind of national outrage that I don't think you get as much in Western countries. Now, the reason I'm saying that is because I can see insults against Western countries all the time on the internet, on particular forums, and you just don't get, in my opinion, the same level of national knee-jerk reaction. You will get individuals complaining, like me, but you don't really get the, certainly not state level critique. I'll give an example. Russia Today, the Russian state broadcaster, is constantly denigrating Western countries. It has nothing positive to say about America, Britain, or France. Nothing. It's constantly trying to have some negative slant about it. Now, you simply don't get Western governments making public statements. Okay, maybe on some level you do in the United States, but I think that you just don't get the same level of knee jerk nationalism. And where nationalism exists, for example, in Europe, it is seen as being on the fringe. We certainly have nationalism, but it is seen as being on the fringe. In a country like China, and in some other Asian countries, in Vietnam, probably in Japan as well, it's mainstream. It isn't seen as radical or extreme. It's absolutely mainstream. That's a fundamental difference. Um, and I'm not saying that's right or wrong. It's just an observation. Um, I mean, there is definitely a difference here. You simply don't get, for example, the BBC. kind of assuming national offence on behalf of the British people. And you don't get the BBC saying, oh, we demand an apology from this Chinese communist newspaper for offending the British, which, by the way, they do. Not long ago, Xinhua decided to call the British barbarians. Now, you don't get the BBC saying the United Kingdom demands an apology. So I do think that some countries are more sensitive than others. China, as a government and as a, in terms of its state media, is constantly trying to demand apologies from somewhere, and I think that's noticeable. Um, I'm not saying it's right or wrong. I think that if people do feel that the country has been slighted, I can understand why they would be pissed off about it. And just for the record here, I'm not saying that people should be insulting or provocative just for the sake of it. Um, but if someone has experienced something in another country, and if they're saying something that is a statement of fact, then instead of getting all nationalistic and overly sensitive, maybe that society should just look at the criticism and think, well, is this fair? Is this something that has happened? In which case, instead of attacking foreigners for just pointing this out or talking about it, why not just concede the fact and say, yeah, this is a problem? I mean, if someone said something about, I don't know, the British being badly behaved with, in terms of our nightlife, for example, Brits drinking too much and getting into fights and so on, I could not honestly, hand on heart, say, oh, well, that's not true. Because it is true. Um, I could not, hand on heart, say that the UK doesn't have certain problems in society with, I don't know, I mean, we're not the cleanest country in the world. We have quite a big problem in this country with littering. There's a wide range of other things. I'm sure people could criticise the UK on foreign policy, certainly. But it's issue by issue basis. And I won't lie, I love my country. I feel patriotic sometimes. And I have on occasion wanted to defend the United Kingdom from outside criticism. And I do have quite a dim view of Britons who constantly slander their own country whilst kind of kowtowing to other countries. I have seen this. I suppose this relates to my Western Communist video, but what I would say is that countries really are like people, and I think all of us around the world have a responsibility to be honest about our own country. If you come from a part of the world that is really striving to develop, what I would amicably say is that the way for a country to be confident, in my opinion, is to not be too sensitive. China, for example, is a powerful country. It's got a large standing army. It's the world's second biggest economy. It's certainly made its mark over the last 15 years. But in terms of sensitivity, it's quite thin skinned, to be quite honest. The situation with Foreign Minister Wang Yi when he visited Canada, to me, just demonstrated that. I mean, basically, a journalist asked a difficult question. He didn't like it. He had a tantrum. And then a lot of Chinese nationalists online forcefully and aggressively defended him to the point of harassing the journalist that asked the question. And I think that's a demonstration of just how pathetic that particular strain of nationalism is. Um, I mean, you simply wouldn't get a comparable situation where a British politician would say something. You will simply not get droves of British people forcefully defending that politician. So I do think there's a fundamental difference. And if this video sounds critical, it's because, well, yeah, to be quite honest, it makes me uneasy, and I think it's unfortunate. Um, on my channel, I just say what's on my mind, and if people are offended by it, well, that's a pity. I don't make videos to offend people, but I think it's important to be candid. And I don't agree, or I don't I don't think that saving face is polite. I think it's dishonest. Um, anyway, let me know your thoughts. Do you think that some cultures are more sensitive than others? Now, if people are saying I'm being rude or whatever, well, I would say it is more rude to be dishonest. That's my own opinion. I don't think that people should offend other countries or cultures just for the sake of it. I think that's a bit crass. But if someone is just telling the truth, they shouldn't be castigated and bullied and harassed simply because they are saying it as a statement of fact. So basically, in conclusion, I think everybody has a responsibility to be open-minded when it comes to criticism of his or her country. You know, just because it is a foreigner that is doing it doesn't mean that they're wrong. And I'm going to hold this rule to myself. I'm going to try and practice what I preach in this regard. So if someone says something that is less than flattering about the UK, if what they're saying is true, then I'm going to try and be open-minded in how I respond to it, if indeed I do respond to it. Let me know your thoughts. Thanks for watching.